The envelope was yellow with age, its edges soft and frayed, like the wings of a dying moth. Thomas Whitmore held it between trembling fingers, staring at the handwriting he had not seen in 53 years. The ink had faded to a ghostly brown, but the curves of each letter were unmistakable. Eleanor. His heart, which had beaten steadily for 8 decades through war and loss and the slow erosion of time, suddenly felt like it might stop altogether. He had found it by accident. The old house on Maple Street, the one where he had grown up, was finally being sold. His daughter Sarah had insisted he go through the attic one last time before the demolition crew arrived next week. Most of what remained up there was junk, she said. Boxes of moldering books, broken furniture, things that should have been thrown away decades ago. But Thomas had climbed those narrow stairs anyway, driven by something he could not name. Perhaps it was nostalgia. Perhaps it was the need to say goodbye to the ghost that still lived in those dusty corners. The letter had been tucked inside an old music box, the kind with a ballerina that spun when you opened the lid. The ballerina no longer turned. Her pink tutu was gray with dust, and one of her delicate arms had broken off long ago. Thomas had not seen this music box since the summer of 1972, the summer Eleanor disappeared. Now, standing in the failing light of the attic, surrounded by the wreckage of his childhood, Thomas felt the weight of all those missing years pressing down on him. His hands shook as he turned the envelope over. It was sealed. She had written him a letter and hidden it in a music box, and somehow it had waited here all this time, patient as a gravestone, holding its secret in the dark. He should open it. He knew he should open it, but fear held him frozen. What if the words inside changed everything he had believed for half a century? What if they changed nothing at all? The night was silent except for the sound of his breathing. Dust motes drifted through the single shaft of light coming from the small round window. This house had been his whole world once. He had taken his first steps on the floors below. He had learned to read in the kitchen while his mother baked bread. He had kissed Eleanor for the first time on the porch, under a sky full of summer stars. That was June 1971. He was 19 years old, and she was 18, and they had believed with the absolute certainty of the young that they would be together forever. But forever had lasted only 14 months. In August of 1972, Eleanor had vanished, not dramatically, not in a way that made the evening news or brought police cars screaming to her parents' house. She had simply gone to the store one afternoon to buy milk and bread, and she had never come home. Her car was found 3 days later in the parking lot of a bus station 200 miles away. The keys were in the ignition. Her purse was on the passenger seat. There was no note, no explanation, no goodbye. The police had investigated, of course. They had asked Thomas 1,000 questions. Did she seem troubled? Had they argued? Was there someone else? He had answered honestly, again and again, his voice breaking. No, no, no. Eleanor had been happy. They had been planning their future. She had just been accepted to nursing school. They were going to get married after she graduated. Everything had been perfect, but perfect things, Thomas had learned, can shatter in an instant. The search had gone on for weeks. Her face had appeared on missing person posters, stapled to telephone poles. Her mother had sobbed on the local news, begging for information. Her father had driven the back roads for months, convinced she was out there somewhere, lost or hurt or held against her will. But no trace of Eleanor was ever found. No body, no clues, nothing but the terrible, endless silence of her absence. Eventually, the search had slowed and then stopped. Her parents had moved away, unable to bear living in a town full of memories and unanswered questions. Thomas had stayed. He had gone to college. He had graduated. He had gotten a job teaching history at the local high school. He had even, after many years, married someone else, a good woman named Margaret, who had loved him patiently and never asked him to forget. They had raised 2 children together. They had built a quiet, decent life. But Eleanor had never truly left him. She lived in the corner of every room, a shadow he caught from the edge of his vision. She was there in songs on the radio, in the smell of honeysuckle, in summer, in dreams that woke him gasping in the dark. Margaret had known, of course. She had always known, and she had loved him anyway, which was perhaps the greatest kindness anyone had ever shown him. Margaret had died 3 years ago. Cancer had taken her slowly, and Thomas had held her hand until the very end. In her final days, she had whispered something to him that he had not understood at the time. She had said, "When you find her, forgive her." He had assumed she was confused, her mind wandering in the fog of morphine. But now, standing in the attic with Eleanor's letter in his hands, he wondered if Margaret had somehow known, if she had seen something he could not see, if she had understood something he had been too afraid to face. Thomas looked down at the envelope again. His name was written across the front in Eleanor's careful script. Thomas Whitmore. Just his name, nothing more. No address, no stamp. This letter had never been meant for the mail. It had been meant for him to find, but only here, only in this house, only when the time was right. Or perhaps, only when it was almost too late. He was 81 years old now. His hands were spotted with age, his back bent, his hair long since turned white. How many years did he have left? 5, 10, not many, certainly. And here was this letter, this impossible letter from the past, offering him something he had given up, hoping for decades ago, answers. But did he want them? That was the question that paralyzed him. For 53 years, he had lived with not knowing. He had built an entire life around the empty space where Eleanor should have been. The mystery of her disappearance had become part of him, woven into his identity like scar tissue around an old wound. What would happen if that wound was suddenly torn open again? What would happen if he learned the truth and found it unbearable? The rational part of his mind, the part that had taught history to teenagers for 4 decades, told him that he needed to open the letter, that he owed it to Eleanor, that he owed it to himself, that mysteries were meant to be solved, and stories were meant to have endings, even if those endings were painful. But there was another part of him, deeper and more primitive, that wanted to put the letter back in the music box and walk away. That wanted to leave it here for the demolition crew to find, or for no one to find at all. That wanted to preserve the version of Eleanor that lived in his memory, forever 18, forever smiling, forever untouched by whatever darkness had pulled her away from him. He stood there for a long time, caught between past and present, between knowing and not knowing. The light from the window shifted as the sun moved lower in the sky. Shadows grew longer. The house settled around him with small creaks in size, as if it too were waiting for him to decide. Finally, with a deep breath that felt like it came from somewhere outside himself, Thomas slid his thumb under the envelope's flap. The old glue gave way easily. He pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded twice. His heart was hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. His vision blurred, and he realized he was crying. The paper crackled as he unfolded it. Eleanor's handwriting covered both sides, small and neat. The date at the top read August 10th, 1972, 2 days before she disappeared. He began to read. "My dearest Thomas," the letter started, "if you are reading this, then I am gone and you are looking for answers. I wish I could give you better ones. I wish I could explain in a way that would make sense, that would make you understand why I had to leave. But the truth is complicated and ugly, and I am afraid that even now as I write these words, I do not fully understand it myself." Thomas's legs felt weak. He lowered himself onto an old trunk, never taking his eyes from the page. "I need to start at the beginning, even though the beginning is hard to talk about. You know that I love you. I have loved you since the first moment I saw you, that day in the library when you were studying for your history exam, and I dropped all my books and you helped me pick them up. You smiled at me, and I thought my heart would burst. Every day since then has been a gift. You have made me happier than I ever imagined I could be. But there are things you do not know about me, Thomas. Things I have been too ashamed to tell you. Things I thought I could bury and forget. I was wrong. My father is not the man you think he is. To the world, he is respectable. A banker, a church deacon, a pillar of the community. But behind closed doors, he is something else entirely. He is a monster. Thomas felt ice forming in his stomach. He gripped the paper tighter. It started when I was 12 years old. I will not go into the details, because even now, even in this letter that may never be read, I cannot bear to put those memories into words. Enough to say that he hurt me, that he continued to hurt me for years, that my mother knew and did nothing, that I learned to smile and pretend that everything was normal, because that is what girls like me are taught to do. We are taught to be quiet, to be good, to protect the family's reputation at all costs, even if the cost is our own souls. When I met you, Thomas, I thought I had finally found a way out. I thought that if I could just hold on until we got married, I could escape that house and never look back. I thought love would be enough to heal me. I thought I could leave the past behind like a snake shedding its skin. But the past does not let go so easily. 3 weeks ago, my father called me into his study. He told me that he had been watching us, you and me. He said he could see how much I loved you, and it made him sick. He said I belonged to him, and that no one else would ever have me. He said that if I tried to leave, if I tried to marry you, he would hurt you. He would ruin your life. He would make sure you lost everything. I did not believe him at first. I thought they were just words, the ravings of a sick man trying to maintain control. But then things started to happen. Small things at first. Your car had a flat tire. Your locker at school was broken into. You got food poisoning and missed 3 days of work. Each time, my father would smile at me across the dinner table, and I would know that he had done it, that he was showing me what he was capable of. And then it got worse. Your little sister, Emily, do you remember when she fell down the stairs at school and broke her arm? Everyone said it was an accident, but it was not an accident, Thomas. My father paid someone to push her. He told me this. He sat across from me in that study, and he told me very calmly that Emily had been lucky, that it could have been much worse, that next time it might be. I cannot let him hurt you. I cannot let him hurt your family. I love you too much, so I have to leave. I have to disappear in a way that makes everyone, including my father, believe that I am gone forever, that I am not coming back, that there is no point in looking for me or punishing you for my absence. I have been planning this for weeks. I have saved money. I have a friend, someone from nursing school, who lives across the country. She has agreed to help me start over. I will take a bus as far as I can go. I will change my name. I will become someone else, someone my father can never find. I know what this will do to you. I know you will blame yourself. You will wonder what you did wrong. You will search for me and call for me and lie awake at night imagining terrible things. I am sorry, Thomas. I am so sorry, but I cannot see any other way. If I stay, he will hurt you. If I tell you the truth, you will try to protect me and he will hurt you worse. The only way to keep you safe is to vanish completely. I am leaving this letter here in the music box you gave me for my 18th birthday, the one with the ballerina that plays our song. I am hiding it in the attic of your house, in the place where we used to meet when we were young, where we would sit for hours and talk about our dreams. I do not know if you will ever find it. Maybe you will sell this house and move away and never come up here again. Maybe the house will burn down or be torn apart. Maybe this letter will turn to dust unread. But I had to write it anyway. I had to leave some piece of the truth behind, even if it stays buried forever. Because you deserve to know that I loved you, that I did not leave because I stopped loving you, that every step I take away from you will feel like dying. If you do find this letter, I want you to know something else. I want you to live, Thomas. I want you to be happy. I want you to fall in love again, to marry, to have children, to build a beautiful life. Do not wait for me. Do not spend your years chasing a ghost. I am gone, and I am not coming back. That is the gift I am giving you. Even though it breaks my heart, I am setting you free. There is one more thing I need to tell you, and this is the hardest part. By the time you read this, if you ever read this, I will have been gone for a very long time. Long enough that maybe my father will be dead. Long enough that maybe the danger will have passed. If that is true, if you are reading this as an old man, then I want you to know where I went. Her friend's name was Catherine Mills. We met in nursing school during my first week. She was kind and funny and asked no questions when I told her I needed help. She lived in a town called Millbrook, in Oregon. It is small and quiet, the kind of place where people do not ask about your past. She said I could stay with her for as long as I needed. She said I could start over. I do not know what will become of me, Thomas. I do not know if I will ever find peace, but I know that leaving you is the hardest thing I have ever done. You were my first love, my only love, and no matter where I go or who I become, part of me will always be yours. Please forgive me. Please forget me. Please be happy. With all my love, always and forever, Eleanor. Thomas sat in the silence of the attic, the letter trembling in his hands. Tears streamed down his face, dripping onto the yellow paper and smudging the ink. He read the letter again and then again. Each time, the words cut deeper, opening wounds he had thought were long healed. Eleanor had not left him. She had left to protect him. She had loved him so much that she had destroyed her own life to save his, and he had never known. For 53 years, he had carried the weight of her disappearance like a stone around his neck, never understanding that she had been carrying an even heavier burden alone. He thought of Eleanor's father, Robert Hayes. The man had died 15 years ago, lauded in his obituary as a community leader and devoted family man. Thomas had seen the notice in the newspaper and felt nothing. But now rage flooded through him, hot and bitter. That monster had destroyed 2 lives with his cruelty. He had stolen Eleanor's childhood, her innocence, her future, and he had stolen Thomas's chance at happiness with her, and he had died peacefully in his sleep, unpunished, his secrets buried with him. Thomas wanted to scream. He wanted to tear the attic apart with his bare hands, but he was an old man, and the attic was just wood and dust, and Robert Hayes was beyond the reach of any earthly justice. Instead, he focused on the one piece of information Eleanor had given him. Catherine Mills, Millbrook, Oregon. It was a thread thin and fragile after all these years, but it was something, it was more than he had ever had before. Thomas stood up, his knees protesting. He carefully folded the letter and put it back in the envelope, then tucked it into his shirt pocket over his heart. He descended the attic stairs slowly, his mind racing. In the kitchen, he found his phone and called his daughter. "Dad?" Sarah answered on the second ring. "Did you finish going through the attic?" "Sarah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I need to ask you something. Do you remember when I used to tell you stories about Eleanor, about the girl I knew before I met your mother?" There was a pause. "Of course, Dad. You loved her. She disappeared." "I found a letter," Thomas said. "She left me a letter. It was hidden all these years, and I think I know where she went." Another pause. Longer this time. "Dad, that was 50 years ago. Even if you knew where she went, she might not still be there. She might not even be alive." "I know," Thomas said quietly, "but I have to try. I have to know." Sarah sighed, and Thomas could picture her rubbing her forehead the way she did when she was worried. She had inherited that gesture from him. "What do you need?" she asked finally. "A plane ticket to Oregon, and maybe someone to drive me around when I get there. My eyes are not what they used to be." "Dad, you are 81 years old. You cannot just fly across the country chasing a 50-year-old lead. What if it is a dead end? What if you get out there and find nothing? Then I find nothing, Thomas said. But Sarah, I have to try. So your mother told me something before she died. She said, when you find her, forgive her. I did not understand it then, but I do now. Margaret always knew I needed closure. She was giving me permission to look. Maybe she even knew somehow that I would find this letter. I do not know, but I have to follow this thread to the end. Do you understand? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, okay, Dad, I will book you a flight, and I will come with you. You should not do this alone. Thomas felt a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly knocked him over. We will leave in 3 days, Sarah said. That will give me time to arrange things at work. And Dad, I hope you find what you are looking for. Thomas hung up the phone and sat down at the kitchen table. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He thought of Eleanor, 18 years old, standing on the porch of this house, her hair catching the last light of day. He thought of the life they might have had together, the children they might have raised, the decades of small, precious moments that had been stolen from them. But he also thought of the life he had lived, Margaret's kindness, his children, his grandchildren, the students he had taught, the quiet satisfactions of a career well spent. It had been a good life even with the hole in the center of it. Eleanor had given him that. By leaving, she had saved him from her father's cruelty. She had protected him at the cost of her own happiness. The question now was whether she had found any happiness of her own, whether she had managed to build a life in Millbrook, Oregon, whether she was even still alive. Thomas did not let himself hope too much. 53 years was a long time. People died. People moved. Memories faded and trails went cold. The chances of finding Eleanor, of actually seeing her face again, were vanishingly small. But he had to try. He owed her that much. 3 days later, Thomas and Sarah boarded a plane in the early morning. Thomas had not flown in years, and the security procedures bewildered him. Sarah guided him through patiently, her hand on his elbow. She had taken a week off from her job as a lawyer, telling her partners it was a family emergency, which, Thomas supposed, it was an emergency 53 years in the making. The flight was long and uncomfortable. Thomas's back ached, and the recycled air made him cough, but he kept his hand pressed against his shirt pocket, feeling the outline of Eleanor's letter. It had become a talisman, proof that what he remembered was real, that Eleanor had existed, that she had loved him. They landed in Portland in the early afternoon and rented a car. Millbrook was a 2-hour drive south, through forests and farmland. Sarah drove, while Thomas watched the landscape slide past the window. Oregon was beautiful in a way that felt almost alien to him. He had spent his whole life in the Midwest, where the land was flat and the horizons went on forever. Here, everything was green and close, the trees pressing in on both sides of the road. They reached Millbrook just before sunset. It was indeed small, barely more than a main street, with a few shops and a diner. Sarah pulled into the parking lot of the only motel in town, a squat building with a flickering neon sign that said vacancy. They checked in, and the woman at the desk, who must have been 70 herself, eyed them curiously. Just passing through? She asked. Actually, Sarah said, we are looking for someone, a woman who might have moved here a long time ago. Her name is Eleanor Hayes, or she might have changed it. She would be in her early 70s now. She had a friend here named Catherine Mills. The desk clerk's eyes widened slightly. Catherine Mills? Oh, honey, Catherine's been dead for 20 years. But I knew her, sweet woman. She was a nurse at the clinic here for decades. Thomas felt his heart sink. If Catherine was dead, then the trail ended here. There would be no one left who remembered Eleanor. No one who could tell him what had become of her. But the clerk was still talking. Catherine had a friend who lived with her for a while back in the 70s. Real quiet woman, kept to herself mostly. I think her name was Ellen Foster. She worked at the library. Thomas and Sarah exchanged glances. Ellen Foster, Eleanor Hayes. It could be a coincidence, but Thomas did not believe in coincidence. Not anymore. Is she still here? Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ellen Foster. The clerk nodded slowly. Last I heard, she is. She retired a few years back, but she still lives in the same house she bought with Catherine. Little blue place at the end of Spruce Street, number 42. Thomas felt like he might faint. Sarah grabbed his arm, steadying him. Thank you, she said to the clerk. Thank you so much. They went to their room, but Thomas could not rest. He paced back and forth, his heart racing. Though Eleanor was here, she was alive. She was less than a mile away. After 53 years, he was going to see her again. Dad, Sarah said gently. It is late. Maybe we should wait until morning. Give you time to prepare. Give her time too, in case the desk clerk calls to warn her. Thomas shook his head. I have waited 53 years, Sarah. I cannot wait another minute. What if something happens? What if I do not wake up tomorrow? What if she does not wake up tomorrow? We are both old. We do not have time to waste. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and Thomas saw tears in her eyes. Okay, she said finally. Okay, let us go. They drove through the quiet streets of Millbrook as darkness fell. Spruce Street was on the edge of town, a narrow lane lined with small houses. Number 42 was at the very end, just as the clerk had said. It was painted a faded blue, with white trim and a garden full of flowers that were closing for the night. A porch light was on, casting a warm yellow glow. Thomas got out of the car, slowly. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Sarah walked beside him, her arm linked through his. Together they climbed the 3 steps to the porch. Thomas reached out and pressed the doorbell. Somewhere inside, he heard it chime. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he heard footsteps. Slow, careful footsteps. The door opened. She stood there, backlit by the light from the hallway. Her hair, which had been dark and long when she was 18, was now white and cut short. Her face was lined, her body thinner than he remembered. But her eyes were the same, wide and brown and full of an emotion Thomas could not name. Thomas? She whispered. He could not speak. His throat had closed completely. He just nodded. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. She made a small broken sound. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. And Thomas felt 53 years of grief and longing and unanswered questions collapse into this single moment. He held her as tightly as his old arms would allow, and he felt her shaking against him, and he realized they were both crying. They stood like that for a long time, 2 old people on a porch in a small town in Oregon, holding on to each other as if they might disappear again if they let go. Sarah watched from a few feet away, her own tears falling silently. Finally, Eleanor pulled back just enough to look up at Thomas's face. She reached up and touched his cheek with trembling fingers, as if she needed to confirm he was real. How? She asked. How did you find me? You left me a letter, Thomas said, his voice hoarse. It's in the music box, in the attic. I found it 3 days ago. Eleanor's eyes widened. You found it? After all these years? Oh God, Thomas. I did not think you ever would. I thought it would stay there forever. I thought maybe that was better. It was not better, Thomas said. Not knowing was not better. But I understand now why you did it. I read your letter. I know about your father. I know what he did to you. I know you left to protect me. Fresh tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I wanted to tell you. I wanted to say goodbye, but I could not risk it. He would have hurt you, Thomas. He would have destroyed you. I know, Thomas said softly. I know, and I forgive you. Eleanor, I forgive you. She sobbed then. A deep, wrenching sound, and Thomas pulled her close again. They stood there, rocking slightly. while the night deepened around them and the stars began to come out overhead. Eventually, Eleanor invited them inside. The house was small but cozy, filled with books and plants and photographs. She made tea with shaking hands while Thomas and Sarah sat at the kitchen table. No one seemed to know how to start. There was too much to say, and the enormity of it felt overwhelming. Finally, Eleanor set down 3 cups of tea and sat across from Thomas. She looked at him steadily, her hands wrapped around her cup for warmth. "I need you to know," she said, "that I thought about you every single day for 53 years. I wondered if you were happy, if you had married, if you had children. I hoped you did. I prayed you did, because if you did not, if you spent your life waiting for me, then everything I sacrificed would have been for nothing." "I did marry," Thomas said gently. "Her name was Margaret. She was a good woman. She loved me, and I loved her. We had 2 children. Sarah here is one of them." He gestured to his daughter, who smiled through her tears. "I had a good life, Eleanor. It was not the life I dreamed of having with you, but it was good." Margaret made sure of that. Eleanor's face crumpled with relief. "Thank God. Oh, thank God. I was so afraid. I had ruined you." "You did not ruin me," Thomas said. "You saved me. Your letter explained everything. You sacrificed your own happiness to keep me safe. That is not ruin, that is love. But I lost you." Eleanor whispered, "I lost all those years with you. I lost our future together." "We both lost that," Thomas said. "But you gained something too, did you not? Tell me about your life, Eleanor. Tell me what happened after you came here." Eleanor took a sip of her tea, gathering her thoughts. "Catherine took me in, just like she promised. She never asked questions. She just gave me a place to stay and helped me get a new identity. I became Ellen Foster. It felt strange at first, answering to a different name. But after a while, it started to feel real. Ellen was who I needed to be to survive." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I got a job at the library. It was quiet work, and I liked that. I liked being surrounded by books, by stories of other people's lives. It helped me forget my own for a while. And slowly, very slowly, I started to heal. Catherine helped with that too. She had her own demons, her own reasons for understanding why someone might need to disappear. We never talked about it much, but we understood each other." "Did you ever try to contact me?" Thomas asked. "Did you ever think about coming back?" Eleanor nodded, tears streaming down her face again. "1,000 times, especially in the first few years, I would sit down and write you letters, long letters, explaining everything, but I never sent them. I could not. My father was still alive, and I knew he was watching. He had people everywhere. If I had reached out to you, he would have known, and he would have hurt you just to punish me." She took a shaky breath. "So I waited. I told myself that when he died, I would come back. I would find you and explain everything and beg for your forgiveness. But then 20 years passed, then 30, and I realized it was too late. You would have moved on. You would have built a life without me. Coming back would only hurt you more, so I stayed here. I stayed Ellen Foster, and I tried to make peace with what I had done." "Did you ever marry?" Sarah asked softly. "Did you have children?" Eleanor shook her head. "No, I could not. Part of me felt like I was still married to Thomas, even though we never had the ceremony, and part of me was just too broken. What my father did to me, it damaged something inside. I could not imagine being intimate with anyone, letting anyone get that close. Catherine understood that. She was the same way for different reasons. We lived together as friends, as sisters almost. She was my family." "When did she die?" Thomas asked. 23 years ago. Cancer. Like so many people. I held her hand at the end, just like she held mine through all those dark years when I first came here. Losing her was the second hardest thing I ever went through. The first was losing you." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Eleanor reached across the table and took Thomas's hand. Her skin was soft and papery, the skin of someone who had lived a long life, but her grip was strong. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Do you hate me? Do you resent me for what I took from you?" Thomas looked at her. This woman, who had been a ghost for most of his life, who was now suddenly impossibly real again. He thought about all the years he had spent wondering, all the nights he had lain awake, imagining terrible scenarios, all the guilt and confusion and pain. But he also thought about Margaret's words, "When you find her, forgive her." And he realized that Margaret had known what Eleanor had not, that love does not keep a ledger, that forgiveness is not something you give because it is deserved, but because carrying anger is too heavy a burden. "No," he said finally. "I do not hate you. I did for a while maybe, or I thought I did. But it was not really hate. It was just pain with nowhere to go. Now that I know the truth, now that I understand why you left, I do not feel anger. I just feel sad. Sad for what we lost. Sad for what was taken from us." "I am sad too," Eleanor said. "I have been sad for 53 years. Thomas squeezed her hand. "Then maybe we can be sad together for a while. Maybe that is enough." They talked until late into the night. Eleanor told them about her years in Millbrook, about the people she had known, the books she had loved, the garden she had planted. Thomas told her about his life, about teaching history, about his children and grandchildren. They shared photos, they laughed at some memories, and cried at others. Sarah sat quietly, witnessing this impossible reunion, this closing of a circle that had been broken for more than half a century. As midnight approached, Thomas realized he was exhausted. The day had been too much, too intense. His body was reminding him that he was an old man who needed rest. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "We have a motel room. I need to sleep." Eleanor nodded, but she did not let go of his hand. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked. And there was fear in her voice, fear that this was all a dream, that he would leave and she would wake up alone again. "Yes," Thomas said firmly. "I will come back tomorrow. And the day after that, for as long as I am here." "How long are you here?" Thomas looked at Sarah, who smiled. "As long as he needs," she said. Eleanor walked them to the door. On the porch under the yellow light, she hugged Thomas again. "Thank you for finding me," she whispered into his shoulder. "Thank you for not hating me. Thank you for loving me enough to let me go," Thomas replied. He and Sarah drove back to the motel in silence. In their room, Thomas sat on the edge of his bed, too wired to sleep despite his exhaustion. Sarah sat beside him. "Dad," she said quietly, "what are you going to do?" "What do you mean?" "The searching shows no. The searching. But what happens now? You live across the country. She has a life here. Are you just going to visit for a few days and then leave again?" Thomas had not thought that far ahead. The quest to find Eleanor had consumed him so completely that he had not considered what would come after. Now sitting in this anonymous motel room, he realized Sarah was right. "What happened now?" "I do not know," he admitted. "I just know that I cannot walk away from her again. Not after all this time. Not after finally understanding what happened." Sarah put her arm around his shoulders. "Then maybe you do not walk away. Maybe you stay. You have nothing tying you to home anymore. Dad, the house is being sold. Mom is gone. Your teaching career ended 15 years ago. Your life is wherever you choose to make it." Thomas looked at his daughter in surprise. "Are you suggesting I move here to Oregon at my age?" "Why not? People start over at all ages. And you would not be starting over, really. You would be finishing something that started 53 years ago. You would be coming full circle." The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. To uproot his entire life, to leave behind everything familiar, to move across the country to be near a woman he had not seen in 5 decades. It seemed insane, but then again, so did flying to Oregon, based on a letter hidden in a music box for half a century. "What about you and your brother?" Thomas asked. "What about my grandchildren? I cannot just leave them." Sarah smiled. "Dad, we are adults with our own lives. We love you, and we will visit. Oregon has airports, and honestly, knowing you are finally at peace, finally happy after all these years of carrying that sadness, that would be the greatest gift you could give us." Thomas felt tears prickling his eyes again. He seemed to be crying constantly today, all the emotions he had held back for decades, finally breaking free. "You are a good daughter," he said. "Your mother raised you well. You raised me well too," Sarah said, "and Mom would want this for you. She told you to forgive Eleanor. Maybe she was also telling you to forgive yourself, to let yourself be happy." Thomas lay down on the bed, still fully clothed. He stared at the ceiling, where a water stain had spread in the shape of a continent. His mind was racing, but underneath the chaos, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Hope. He returned to Eleanor's house the next morning with fresh coffee and pastries from the diner. She answered the door looking nervous, as if she had spent the night convinced he would not come back. When she saw him standing there, the relief on her face was so profound that Thomas felt his heart break a little. They spent the day together, just talking. There was so much to catch up on, so many years to account for. Eleanor showed him the garden she had built, explaining each plant and where it had come from. She showed him the room where Catherine had lived, which she had kept exactly as it was the day her friend died, a shrine to their friendship. She showed him photo albums, full of a life he had not been part of, and he showed her pictures on his phone of his children and grandchildren. At one point, they sat on her back porch, watching birds flit between the feeders she had hung from the trees. The silence between them was comfortable now, not weighted with all the things left unsaid. "Thomas," Eleanor said eventually, "can I ask you something? Anything? Do you think we can really go back after all this time? I am not the girl you knew. You are not the boy I left behind. We are strangers in so many ways." Thomas considered this carefully. "No," he said finally. "We cannot go back. Those people are gone. That world is gone. But maybe we can go forward. Maybe we can get to know who we are now, these old people we have become. Maybe there is something there worth finding." Eleanor smiled, and Thomas saw a glimpse of the girl she had been, shining through the woman she had become. "I would like that," she said. "I would like that very much." Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Thomas would arrive in the morning, and they would have breakfast together. Then they would walk through Millbrook, Eleanor showing him the places that had become meaningful to her over the years. The library where she had worked, the clinic where Catherine had been a nurse, the small cemetery where Catherine was buried, and where Eleanor said she hoped to be buried someday too. In the afternoons, they would sit in Eleanor's living room, and she would read to him from books she loved. Her voice had aged, becoming softer and slightly hoarse, but Thomas loved listening to it. It was like a song he had forgotten, suddenly playing again after decades of silence. In the evenings, Sarah would join them for dinner. Eleanor had been hesitant about meeting Thomas's daughter, at first afraid that Sarah would resent her for the pain she had caused. But Sarah had hugged her and said, "You gave me my father. If you had not left, if your father had hurt him the way he hurt you, I might not exist. So thank you for being brave enough to protect him." Eleanor had cried again then, and Sarah had held her. This woman who was not her mother, but who had shaped her father's life in ways Sarah was only beginning to understand. A week passed, then two. Sarah had to return home for work. But Thomas stayed. He extended his motel reservation, then extended it again. The woman at the desk stopped asking when he was checking out. One evening, as Thomas was preparing to leave Eleanor's house for the night, she caught his hand. "Do you have to go?" she asked quietly. Thomas looked at her, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes. I am asking if you would consider staying here, not just in Millbrook, here, in this house, with me. I know it is crazy. I know we are too old for this, but I have spent 53 years alone, Thomas, and I do not want to spend whatever time I have left that way. Not when you are here. Not when we have been given this impossible second chance. Thomas felt his heart hammering. Eleanor, I am 81 years old. You are 71. We do not know each other anymore. Not really. What if we drive each other crazy? What if this reunion is just nostalgia and we discover we have nothing in common? Then we will discover that, Eleanor said. But what if we do not? What if we discover that we still fit together, even after all these years? Is not that worth finding out? Thomas thought about his empty house back home, half packed in boxes, waiting to be sold to strangers. He thought about his quiet, orderly life, pleasant but hollow. He thought about Margaret's words, when you find her, forgive her. He thought about all the years he had spent living with the ghost of Eleanor and how exhausting it had been to love someone who was not there. Yes, he said finally, it is worth finding out. He moved in 3 weeks later. Sarah helped him pack up his house and arrange for his belongings to be shipped to Oregon. His son called him, concerned, asking if he was sure about this. Thomas assured him that he had never been more sure of anything in his life. The first few weeks of living together were awkward. They had to learn each other's rhythms again. Thomas liked to wake up early and read the newspaper with his coffee. Eleanor preferred to sleep late and start the day slowly. Thomas was neat to the point of compulsiveness. Eleanor was more relaxed about clutter. They bickered about small things like how to load the dishwasher and what temperature to set the thermostat. But they also laughed. They laughed more than Thomas had laughed in years. They told each other stories from the decades they had spent apart, filling in all the blank spaces. They cooked meals together, Thomas preparing his mother's recipes and Eleanor adding her own touches. They watched old movies on television, sitting close on the couch, sometimes holding hands. And slowly, carefully, they began to fall in love again. Not the wild, desperate love of teenagers who think they will live forever, but the quieter, deeper love of people who know that time is precious and finite, who understand that every day together is a gift that could be taken away at any moment. 6 months after Thomas moved in, they were sitting in the garden on a warm spring evening when Eleanor suddenly said, "I want to go back." Thomas looked at her in surprise. "Go back where?" "To your house, the one on Maple Street. I know it is going to be demolished soon, but I want to see it one more time. I want to see the place where we fell in love, where we were happy, before everything fell apart." Thomas hesitated. The house was already sold. The demolition was scheduled for the following month. Going back felt like reopening a wound that had finally started to heal. But when he looked at Eleanor's face, he saw how much it meant to her. "All right," he said. "Let us go back." They flew to the Midwest. 2 weeks later, Sarah met them at the airport and drove them to Maple Street. The house looked even more dilapidated than it had when Thomas had been there to find the letter. The windows were boarded up. The porch sagged dangerously. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, marked with no trespassing signs. But Thomas still had the key. He and Eleanor ducked under the fence and approached the front door. The key stuck in the lock, rusted from disuse, but eventually it turned. The door swung open with a groan of protesting hinges. Inside, the house was dim and dusty. Most of the furniture had been removed. What remained was covered in sheets, ghostly shapes in the shadows. Their footsteps echoed on the bare floors. Eleanor walked through the room slowly, trailing her fingers along the walls. In the living room, she stopped and closed her eyes. "This is where we used to dance," she said softly. "Your mother would play records on that old turntable, and we would dance even though neither of us knew how. We would step on each other's feet and laugh." Thomas remembered. He could almost hear the music, almost see Eleanor as she had been, young and alive and so beautiful it hurt to look at her. They moved through the house, gathering memories like shells on a beach. The kitchen, where Eleanor had helped his mother bake cookies. The back porch, where they had sat on summer nights, talking until the stars came out. The stairs leading up to the second floor, worn smooth by generations of feet. Eleanor paused at the base of the stairs. "Can we go up?" she asked. "To the attic." Thomas nodded. They climbed slowly, carefully, Thomas going first to make sure the steps would hold their weight. The attic door was open, just as he had left it months ago. Sunlight streamed through the small round window, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. Eleanor walked to the center of the room and turned in a slow circle. "This is where you found the letter," she said. "Yes, it was in the music box." "Over there," Thomas pointed to the corner where he had left it. Eleanor walked over and picked up the music box. The ballerina was still broken, still frozen, mid-pirouette. She wound the key on the bottom, and after a few false starts, the mechanism caught. A thin, tinny melody began to play. Their song, the one they had danced to dozens of times. Eleanor started to cry. Thomas went to her and took her in his arms. They swayed together in the dusty attic, dancing to the broken music box, two old people saying goodbye to the young lovers they had been. When the music wound down and stopped, Eleanor looked up at Thomas. "Thank you," she said, "for finding the letter, for coming to Oregon, for giving us this second chance." "Thank you for leaving it," Thomas replied, "for trusting that someday I would find it, for loving me enough to let me go." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the place where their story had both ended and begun again. Then together, they descended the stairs and walked out of the house for the last time. A month later, Thomas received a call from the demolition company. The house on Maple Street was gone. They had bulldozed it in a single afternoon, reducing 80 years of memories to rubble. Thomas felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of closure. That chapter of his life was over. The house had served its purpose. It had kept Eleanor's letter safe until he was ready to find it. Now he had a new home, a new life. And Eleanor, they settled into a comfortable rhythm. Thomas joined the local historical society and gave talks about Midwestern history. Eleanor volunteered at the library, helping children learn to read. They made friends in Millbrook, a small circle of other retirees who gathered for potluck dinners and card games. Sarah and her family visited several times, and Thomas's son came once, tentatively, unsure what to make of his father's new life. But when he saw Thomas and Eleanor together, saw the way they looked at each other, the way they moved around the kitchen in an easy dance of familiarity, he understood. He hugged his father and whispered, "I am happy for you, Dad. You deserve this." The years passed, not quickly, but not slowly either, just at the pace that time moves when you are old and content. Thomas's health began to decline. His heart, which had survived so much, began to falter. The doctors gave him medications and warned him to take it easy. Eleanor fussed over him, making sure he took his pills, limiting his salt intake, worrying in the way that people who love you always worry. On a spring morning, 5 years after Thomas had first knocked on Eleanor's door, he woke to find her standing by the bedroom window, looking out at the garden. The early light made her white hair glow like a halo. "Eleanor," he said softly. She turned, and he saw that she had been crying. "What is wrong?" he asked, struggling to sit up. She came to the bed and sat beside him, taking his hand. "Nothing is wrong," she said. "I was just thinking about how lucky we are. We got 5 years, Thomas. After everything that happened, after 53 years apart, we got 5 more years together. That is more than most people get." Thomas felt a chill run through him. "Why are you talking like this?" Eleanor smiled sadly. "Because we are old, my love. Because our time is running out. And I want to make sure you know how grateful I am for finding me, for forgiving me, for loving me again. I never stopped loving you, Thomas said. Not for a single day in 53 years. You were always there, Eleanor. Always. They sat together in the morning light, holding hands, not speaking. Sometimes words were not necessary. Sometimes just being together was enough. 2 months later, Thomas had a heart attack. Eleanor found him collapsed in the garden, the watering can still in his hand. She called 911 and rode with him in the ambulance, holding his hand, begging him not to leave her. Not now, not yet. He survived, but barely. The doctors said his heart was too damaged. There was nothing more they could do except make him comfortable. He had weeks, maybe days. Sarah and her brother came immediately. They sat vigil by their father's bedside, along with Eleanor. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes confused. In his clearer moments, he would squeeze Eleanor's hand and smile at her. "No regrets," he whispered once. "No regrets," she agreed, though tears streamed down her face. On his last day, Thomas woke in the evening to find Eleanor alone with him. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of the monitors. She was holding his hand, her head bowed as if in prayer. "Eleanor," he said, his voice barely audible. She looked up, her eyes red from crying. "I am here, my love. I am here. I want you to know something," Thomas said, each word an effort. "These last 5 years, they were the happiest of my life, even happier than when we were young, because we knew how precious they were. We did not take a single moment for granted." "I know," Eleanor whispered. "I know, Thomas. I am not afraid," he said. "I am not afraid to die, because I got to see you again. I got to hold you. I got to tell you I love you. That is all I ever wanted." Eleanor leaned down and kissed his forehead. "I love you too. I have always loved you, in this life and whatever comes next." Thomas smiled. His eyes started to close. "Dance with me," he murmured. "One more time, dance with me, Eleanor." Eleanor climbed carefully onto the hospital bed, lying beside him, wrapping her arms around him as gently as she could. She hummed their song, the one from the music box, and Thomas felt himself swaying to the rhythm, even though neither of them was moving. He died peacefully, a few minutes later, with Eleanor holding him and humming softly in his ear. His last thought was of her at 18, standing on the porch of the house on Maple Street, the setting sun in her hair, smiling at him as if he were the only person in the world. Eleanor stayed with him for a long time after he was gone. The nurses came and went quietly, giving her space. Finally, Sarah came in and gently helped her up. "He was happy," Sarah said. "At the end, he was so happy, Mom Eleanor." Eleanor looked at this woman who was not her daughter, but who had given her the gift of these final years with Thomas. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing him to me. Thank you for giving him permission to find me." "He would have found you anyway," Sarah said, smiling through her tears. "He never stopped looking, even when he did not know he was looking. You were always his North Star." The funeral was small but beautiful. They buried Thomas in the Millbrook Cemetery, next to the plot Eleanor had reserved for herself. The headstone was simple: Thomas Whitmore, beloved father, teacher, and friend. Reunited at last. Eleanor lived for 3 more years after Thomas died. She spent them quietly, tending her garden, volunteering at the library, visiting Thomas's grave every day. She talked to him constantly, telling him about her day, about the books she was reading, about the changing seasons. Sometimes she brought the old music box and wound it up, letting their song play over his grave. Sarah visited often, and sometimes brought her children. Eleanor delighted in them, these grandchildren who carried Thomas's blood, even if they did not carry hers. They called her Grandma Eleanor, and she treasured every moment with them. On a warm summer evening, Almost exactly 3 years after Thomas's death, Eleanor lay down in her bed and did not wake up. She died peacefully in her sleep, the way she had always hoped she would. On her nightstand was a photograph of Thomas, taken during one of their last good days together. He was laughing at something she had said, his eyes full of light and love. They buried her beside Thomas, and on her headstone, Sarah had inscribed, Eleanor Hayes Foster. She ran far to keep him safe. She came home to his heart. At the funeral, Sarah read the letter that Eleanor had left hidden in the music box 58 years earlier. She read it in full, her voice breaking several times, but never stopping. The gathered mourners wept as they listened to the story of two young people torn apart by cruelty, and the miracle that had brought them back together decades later. After the service, as people were leaving, an elderly woman approached Sarah. She was frail and bent with age, but her eyes were sharp. "You do not know me," the woman said. "But I knew Eleanor. We worked together at the library. She talked about Thomas all the time in those last few years. She said finding him again was like being brought back to life after being dead for 53 years. Sarah smiled. "That sounds like her. There is something else," the woman continued. "Something Eleanor asked me to give you if anything happened to her. She did not want to burden Thomas's children with it while she was alive, but she wanted you to know." She handed Sarah an envelope. Inside was a check for a substantial amount of money. "Eleanor never spent much," the woman explained. "She lived simply, saved everything she earned. She told me this money was for Thomas's children and grandchildren. She said it was the inheritance she could not give them as a mother, but wanted to give them as a friend. She said to tell you it was from both of them, from her and Thomas." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Thank you for telling me." Later, alone in Eleanor's house, which would soon be sold, Sarah sat in the living room and looked through the photo albums Eleanor had kept. There were pictures of Catherine, pictures of the library, pictures of the garden in every season, and scattered throughout, tucked carefully between the pages, were old photographs of Thomas as a young man. Eleanor must have gotten them somehow, perhaps from mutual friends back home who did not know what had happened to her. She had carried him with her all those years. Sarah realized, even when she thought she would never see him again, she had kept him close, and in the end, love had brought them back together, damaged and scarred and far too late, but together nonetheless. Sarah took one of the photos, a picture of Eleanor and Thomas in the garden, taken by Sarah herself during one of her visits. They were both smiling, their hands clasped, the roses blooming behind them. She would frame it and keep it on her desk, a reminder that love does not follow timelines or logic, that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that take a lifetime to unfold, that happy endings can come when you least expect them, even after decades of sorrow. And she would tell her children about Thomas and Eleanor, about the letter hidden in a music box, about 53 years of separation and 5 years of reunion. She would tell them that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone go, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is find your way back. Because in the end, Thomas and Eleanor's story was not about the years they lost. It was about the love that survived those years, patient and enduring, waiting for the moment when it could bloom again. It was about forgiveness and sacrifice, and the strange, meandering paths that sometimes lead us exactly where we need to be. The house on Maple Street was gone, demolished and forgotten, but the love that had been born there, in the space between two young hearts, had survived everything. War and loss, silence and separation, time itself, and in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Thomas and Eleanor were together now wherever the dead go, and if there was any justice in the universe, they were young again, dancing on a porch under a sky full of stars, with nothing but forever ahead of them. The letter, the one that had started it all, Sarah kept in a safe deposit box. Someday she would pass it down to her children, and they would pass it to theirs. It would become a family legend, the story of love that refused to die. And maybe in some distant future, another person would hold that yellow paper and read those faded words and understand that love, real love, is the only thing that truly lasts. Years later, when Sarah was an old woman herself, she would sometimes visit the cemetery in Millbrook. She would stand between the two headstones, reading the inscriptions, and she would remember. She would remember her father's face when he found that letter. She would remember the sound of Eleanor humming their song. She would remember the way they looked at each other as if they were the only two people in the world. And she would smile because she knew something that most people never learn, that it is never too late, that love can survive anything, even 53 years of silence, that happy endings do not always come when you expect them, but they come nonetheless, for those brave enough to keep searching. The last letter had changed everything. It had answered questions that had haunted a man for more than half a century. It had brought two lost souls back together. It had proved that some loves are so powerful that not even time can destroy them. And in the end, is not that what we all hope for? To love and be loved so completely that even when we are apart, even when the world conspires to keep us separated, something essential remains. Some thread that connects us across distance and time. Some promise that says, I am here. I remember, I am waiting. Thomas and Eleanor had kept that promise. For 53 years, they had remembered. And when fate finally brought them back together, they had seized their second chance with both hands. They had loved each other fiercely and gratefully, knowing that every moment was borrowed, every day a gift. That is how their story ended. Or perhaps it did not end at all. Perhaps somewhere in some way we cannot understand, they are still dancing, still laughing, still holding each other, and marveling at the miracle of being together again. The letter sits in its safe deposit box, waiting for the next person who needs to believe in impossible reunions, waiting to remind someone that love does not follow rules or timelines, that it cannot be measured or predicted or controlled. It simply is, as constant as the stars, as patient as stone, as powerful as time itself. And that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything.